Morning. Good morning. Welcome. Welcome, everyone. And I want to begin with just a word of encouragement and a word of thanks, particularly to Rick Jennings and his team. Is Rick in the room this morning? Right there. And Brenda and Warren, Gail, the whole team from last night was amazing. It was a great night in here. The table decorations we kept and the photographs. Just was a wonderful night here and a wonderful talk from Mike Gminski, who was with us this morning. Before we begin, just want to direct your attention on your tables. There is a flyer that looks like this with a QR code. And this is the upcoming golf tournament, which is Tuesday, October the 6th at Stone Ferry again. This is our third annual golf tournament, and registration is open for that. So I just commend that to you. This golf tournament is our major fundraiser for the Fellowship of Christian Athletes in the West Ashley area. And so I just pass this along to you. And if you want to take your phone and point it at that QR code, it will pop up, or you can just take the flyer with you when you go today. I think that'll be all right. But anyway, that's coming up in October. And last night's dinner was an appreciation dinner for our sponsors, for those who are involved with FCA in this area of the Low Country. And it was a wonderful night. And I have to start off by saying that, as I mentioned in the 9 o'clock, and I'll say it again at 11, but I realized this past week that 50 years ago through this week was when I moved into my dorm at Duke as a freshman. And shortly after that, I met this really tall guy from Connecticut named Mike. And here we are 50 years later. But back then, I wasn't wearing something like this. And I don't imagine too many people in my fraternity thought that I ever would. God's grace is plentiful, right? And I remember one time going to a dinner in Durham, and I was running late, of course, and flying up 95 in the afternoon, got to this dinner. It was about 7 o'clock, 9 o'clock game in Cameron that night. During the week, I think I finished up the staff meeting and zoomed up and went straight to the dinner. So I had my collar on and my clergy shirt, and my fraternity crowd had this room in this restaurant. And so I, busted into this room in the restaurant with my collar on. Several of the guys in there I hadn't seen since graduation. And one of them, they're all looked up to me, and one of them said, "Who do you think you're kidding?" No one, actually no one. But I got to follow that up this morning because I'm in here and Mike walks in and he looks at me and he looks up and down at this and he goes, "Wow." Yeah. So probably that same look of disbelief. But we all have our journeys, as I said, at 9 o'clock, and we'll say it again at 11. We're all on a journey, and he and I have had a great 50-year journey as friends. And one of the things that I love about our friendship is that I met, I liked Mike before I ever saw him on the basketball court. But first time I ever saw him on the basketball court, a couple of months after I met him, I was like, wow, this guy is really good. And he is and was, and played for Duke from, I guess probably November. The season started in 1976 through graduation in 1980. And Mike came to Duke as a 17-year-old freshman, finished high school early and came to Duke fall of 1976 and started ever since during his entire career. He did so well that his jersey, number 43, is one of the retired jerseys in the Raptors at Cameron's. He was drafted 7th in the first round of the NBA draft by the New Jersey Nets in 1980. Played for them for 8 years, then for Philadelphia for the 76ers, and then for the Charlotte Hornets from 91 to 94. and then finished his career with the Milwaukee Bucks. And he, in the pros, averaged 11 points and 7 rebounds. At Duke, he was an All-American twice, 1979 ACC Player of the Year, 3 times All-ACC first team. And I love this also. He is a part of the All-ACC 50 players in 50 years, the greatest 50 players in ACC history. He is one of them. He's still number 5 on the Duke scoring list and number 2 all-time rebounder with Duke. Great player at Duke. And he's a man of the Lord. And his journey that he's going to tell you about is a pretty phenomenal journey. So I'm going to introduce Mike at this time and pray for him just before we started this morning. We'll have an opportunity for some questions and answers when we finish up. But want to ask you all to join me in welcoming to Old St. Andrews, Mike Gminski. Amen.
Thank you, Marshall. And I tell you, it is a lot less expensive than you and this outfit as opposed to when you were a lawyer. So I'm going to flesh out a little bit of my past, which is relevant to my present. I work in the recovery community in Charlotte, and I've really been put in some interesting situations in that role. And a few months ago, we were in a room with another guy that I worked with and a doctor, and it was a room full of guys who were kind of on the fence. They were still out there drinking and drugging, but were thinking about coming into recovery. And the doctor stood up and said, "What if I told you all that I had one pill that I could give you and you would never drink for the rest of your life?" And everybody pondered that for a while. We didn't get a response. And finally, that guy raised his hand and the doctor pointed him out. And the guy said, "What if we take 2? But such is the mentality of an alcoholic or an addict. And that mindset's important. I grew up in Connecticut, as Marshall said, and I was pretty precocious. I was this tall at 15. I made my first all-state team when I was 15 and a sophomore. And that's also when I started drinking beer. Now, it was not pure pressure. I was on the varsity with varsity players and guys who were older, and I was hanging out with them, and there were parties, and everybody was drinking beer. And for those of you of this vintage, you remember back then, ex-athletes were advertising beer on TV. And I was like, Dave Cowan, one of my heroes, was advertising Miller Lite, and I want to be an ex-athlete sometime, and it's okay with that. So, beer's okay. And it was part of our family. It was part of family get-togethers. And I never saw any adverse effects to it. I never saw any fights. I never saw any marriage breakups. I never saw anything bad with people drinking. So that also, in my mind, justified me making it a little bit easier. And even through high school and through a lot of my life, there were never any consequences to my drinking. In high school, twice I made All-State. I was third in my class when I graduated at 16. I went to Duke. Marshall told you about my career. And I can't honestly say here before you today that I would have been any better had I never started drinking. I probably would have been, but I was achieving all my dreams and still doing that and still performing well in school and doing all the right things. And it continued in college. As Marshall will attest to, I had a very active social life while I was at Duke. But I did my work on the court, and I graduated with honors with 3.4 as a history major. was 3-time academic All-American. So again, no real consequence, no DUIs, no arrests, no anything, controversy as a result of it. And that continued into the pros. Now, I knew when I got to that level that I was not going to be at the level where I was at Duke, but I had a very good career, played on some great teams, made some great friends. And the transition for me was when I retired in '94, I became a broadcaster. The Hornets had a position open, and I thought about it that summer, and it was an opportunity that I took advantage of. And it was kind of a strange time for me because we were chartering and the broadcast team traveled with the team. But my guys were broadcast guys. And there was a lot of free time on the road as opposed to, it being very regimented as a player. And then you're also getting as much rest as you can. But, life on the road was meet downstairs in the hotel bar, have a few drinks, go out to dinner, drink some wine, come back to the hotel, have a few more cocktails, go to bed. That was life on the road. And that's when I started drinking more liquor. Vodka was my beverage of choice. And there were a few bumps in the road in my life during that time. And I fell into a little bit of a mode of self-medicating when those times occurred. I will tell you that faith was not a part of my upbringing. Church was not a part of my upbringing. And I really can't say that in that magnificent chapel we have at Duke that I was ever in there more than once or twice in the 4 years that I was in school. So I didn't have that to rely on. So I would just drink a little bit more if life got a little bit rocky. Got into a really difficult time in the early 2000s. My ex-wife's business went bankrupt and the internet bust in 2000. Lost most of the money that I had made playing ball. We had a 4-year-old son. It took a real heavy toll on our marriage, which eventually ended. And I took my self-medicating to a little bit higher level during that time. Got divorced, fell in love with a woman who was 23 years younger than me. Would constantly ask her, "Are you really sure?" And she goes, "Yeah," she never doubted her love for me or mine for her. So we got engaged in 2013. She had some physical issues that she had to deal with. She had an aortic stenosis that was going to need to be replaced at some point in time, and also liver issues. She had a bad liver episode in 2014. We were going to be married that summer, so we postponed it to 2015. In 2015, I'm doing a game in Pittsburgh on Valentine's Day, and I fly home, and Sarah is just really out of sorts, and I can tell she is really not feeling well, really, really sick. And I'm saying, do you need to go to the emergency room? And she was, no, I'll be okay. And, I acquiesced and got her comfortable, went out to get a couple of things at the store, came back, listened at the door, it was quiet. She was, I figured I'd let her sleep. And I checked back in with her about a half hour later. And there was blood coming out of her mouth and her nose, and she was unresponsive. I went into auto mode. I called 911. They're talking me through heart massage until the EMTs get there. The first heart massage that I hear with blood comes out of her and gets all over my shirt. That's how I answer the door when the police and the EMTs get there. So while they're working on her in the bedroom, the police are asking me questions in the other room, making sure that I didn't kill her. And that went on for a couple of hours. They got her sort of stable. Her heart stopped twice at the apartment for a little over 4 minutes each. got it going again. Same thing happened at the hospital later on. I spent all night sleeping near the NICU, or near the intensive care unit where she was, woke up the next morning and doctors came in and they said, you know, we can't tell you what to do, but she's, for all intents and purposes, brain dead. And the family, her family was all there, and everyone in the room looked to me to make that call, and decided to take her off life support at noon that day, gave her a kiss, and she was gone. And if you could envision a computer completely blowing up with smoke coming out of it, that's what happened inside my brain. So what I didn't do was I didn't seek clergy. I didn't seek professional help. I didn't seek my friends. I'm going to take self-medicating to a new level. And it really was my athletic pride and ego. You know, nobody in my family ever saw a therapist. You know, that just wasn't part of the deal. And, you know, I had people come to me and talk about grief counseling. I'm like, no, I got this. And everybody around me really gave me about a 2-year hall pass on my drinking. And, you know, they would say things like, yeah, that happened to me, I was drinking too, which is really bad advice if you ever have anybody in that situation. But in 2017, my Duke teammates, my brothers, saw where this was going. And they had arranged for me to go into treatment. And they had one of the players, Jim Sudduth, was going to come pick me up, drive me. Everything was all set. All I had to do was say yes. And Tommy Denard was here today. His brother Kenny was the one who called me on the phone to have the intervention. I was driving up to see my son play football at high school. And I was not ready to hear the message. And I cussed him out for about 20, 25 minutes. I will say that the conversation did help in the way that I verbalized for the first time. I told him, I said, I know I've got a problem, but here's the caveat, but I can handle it. No. Hung up from him. I'm sitting at a gas station for the last part of the fall, a mile down the road to the right-hand side is Price School. 400 yards to my left is an ABC store. Where do I go first? ABC store. Get some vodka, go to the football game, watch him play, and then go back to Charlotte. And then I basically went off the grid for 3 years. I shut everybody out. I didn't want to hear that call again. And I continued to work, continued to broadcast, was really starting to spiral. And really the best thing that ever happened to me was COVID. Because in 2020, if you remember, they stopped all the tournaments. They stopped the NCAA tournament and the ACC tournament. So I barely got through that broadcast season. And I knew, well, I didn't know what the next year was going to look like as far as what basketball was going to be, what broadcasting, but I knew whatever it was that I was not going to be able to perform. And I kept, so all that spring and early summers, kept negotiating with myself, which is something that we do, and we lose all those negotiations. Well, I'll just drink through April and then get help. Well, maybe, go through spring. No, maybe I'll go to my birthday. So my son Noah and I we're sequestered in place, and he's living with me in my apartment. He's seeing all this. And when things came to a head, I was, we think we're the smartest people on the planet, and the recycling bin was filling up pretty rapidly with vodka bottles. I was drinking a fifth, 2/5 a day at that point. And I was taking every other bottle and throwing it in the woods out behind our house, our apartment, to keep the recycling in check. The flaw in that program was I was throwing it all in the same place. And Noah was out walking his dog one time and he saw that in the woods behind the house. So one day I go out to go to the APC store and then go to Harris Teeter and then come back home. Those are the only places really that you could go that were open. And I came back home and on the kitchen table were about 10 or 15 dirty, filthy, cracked, empty vodka bottles with a letter that ended, "Dad, I want to help you, but you have to want to help yourself. I love you." And it was the most shame that I had ever felt in my life. I just fell to my knees and, I'm supposed to be the role model and father and dad and everything to this young man and what I'd done to him. And I think it's necessary in recovery for everybody to feel that, but not live in it. And so it was really important for me to feel that shame and to go through that. We had several tearful conversations, and he wound up having an intervention for me on July 10th of 2020. He came walking out of his room with his computer open, and it was a Zoom intervention with two guys down in Florida where I was going to go. And almost immediately I had this sense of peace come over me because I knew what it was, and I was begging for that to happen. I just wasn't strong enough to do it myself. And 20 minutes in, I said, when can I come down? And they said, well, we won't have a spot open for you until the 13th. And he said, well, and you have to keep drinking until then because you're such a high seizure risk. And I was like, I think I can do that. And I'm drinking on my way down to the detox and get dropped off. Takes me down along with my ex-wife. And I'm a hot mess when I get out of the car and, they almost put me in the ICU. And I'm in detox for 11 days and then treatment for 2 months. And I would love to tell you all that I had this kind of road to Damascus moment in my coming to Christianity and coming to faith. It was more over time. And the reason is because I had to clear my head first and detox and go through all of that early on. And I was not part of a 12-step program. We did a lot of activities. There was a lot of physical wellness that was attended to as well as individual therapy. But church was also a part of what we did. And we had a Bible study every Wednesday. And so orally, I was getting the messages that I was getting at church every Sunday seemed to come right at me and make real sense to me. And it was at that church that they were giving out free Bibles, first Bible that I ever really started to read. So I with Marshall last night that we all got Bibles when we graduated from Duke. And I don't think that one ever found its way out of the box. But I started to clear my head. I started to read. And it was funny that I got they said, I was talking to somebody early on. I said, if you find something in the Bible that really hits your heart, you should underline it or write some notes. And I looked at it like, you can't write the Bible. It's the Bible. If you can't put any marks in it, if you see the one that I have at home, it's the whole thing is underlined. It didn't have notes written in it now. But I started to grow in my faith. I started to really read scripture. I was under the impression, I'm a Christian. I'm just going to stay in the New Testament. And I found out the whole book is pretty important. But things grew for me, and my faith grew, and really my recovery and my walk with Christ are intertwined and separated. I know that intervention, that he was in the room then. because it was the first peace that I felt since Sarah died. And that was the huge part, the huge emotion for me early on was peace that I found in him and in my scripture. My sober date is July 14, 2020, and I'm 6+ years sober to this point. The other really important date, and this spoke to the FCA group last night. Jim Sudduth, the teammate that I mentioned earlier, was he was president of the FCA chapter at Duke when he was there in 1981. And the Duke chapter and the North Carolina chapter got to be really close. And for the last 46 years, every 2 years, those groups would have a reunion someplace with about 20 to 30 people coming back each 2 years. And in 2023, I was early in recovery, and Jim asked me, the group invited me to come up and share my story and my faith. And I was really overjoyed to do it and had a great weekend. So I knew that I wanted to be baptized. I knew that I wanted Jim to do it, but I was holding out for the Super Bowl of baptisms. Every 2 years, he would take a trip over to Israel and have a 12-day tour over in the Holy Land. So I was holding out for the Jordan River. I wanted to really get baptized. But this group in 2023 were up at Lake Norman, up north in Charlotte. And Sunday night, I went to him and I said, Jim, I really feel strongly about, what do you think about baptizing you tomorrow out in the lake? And the whole group, they were completely into it. And so May 29th, 2023 is when I was baptized. Probably fitting a lake for me in any kind of pool, I probably would have splashed everybody everywhere. But and I'm glad that Jim is 6'7", so when he put me under the water, I felt reasonably comfortable that I was going to come back out. But it was a powerful experience. A dove didn't come down from the sky and didn't hear a voice, but life certainly changed for me and just strengthened my faith. And it's been such a big part of where I am right now. I've been very open about my recovery and my faith in an effort to take the stigma off of anybody who wants to seek help. I think as a society, we're becoming more accepting of people who are, it's not you don't get this red letter on you, big AIDS, it's alcohol, or, it's okay. And it's preferable to admit you have the problem and seek help. So that's been my journey. There were so many times that I questioned why is this happening to me? Why did Sarah die? Why, and I can look back now and see that everything in my life leading up to this point has been served a purpose for me to be right where I am right now. And he's using me as his voice in recovery and faith. And it's been an amazing journey. And I take it day by day. I try now, I'll close before taking some questions. I try to live my life, 3 things, being in humility, in gratitude, and in service. I will tell you that the humility part was the tough one. Because frankly, I couldn't go out in the court and guard Kareem Abdul-Jabbar and be humble. I had to be relatively confident in my abilities to try to even do that. But now that in recovery, it's come a lot easier. I'm grateful every single day for where I am and the mission that I'm on. And the service part is huge. Tony Bennett was a dear friend of mine, coach at Virginia, and we were teammates actually at the Hornets for the last 3 years of my career, and his only 3 years. He was born to be a coach, and he was a fabulous one. deep faith, and we would talk more about faith than basketball whenever I covered games up at UVA. And one of his pillars that he built his program on is servanthood, and within the team and within the community. And one of the things early on in me reading scripture, that one of the stories that I fell in love with was Christ washing the feet of the disciples at the Last Supper. And one of the last things that Tony and I would say to each other when we left was, let's go wash some feet. And that became our mantra, and that reminds me every day about service and how I'm living my life. I'll conclude by saying that Paul, in his letters, said, God's grace and peace to you all, and that's my wish for you. That's my prayer for you. And I know that those words, I'm preaching to the choir, as it were. But it's been a joy to be up here with Marshall. He's been an incredible spiritual mentor to me, as well as Jim Sudduth. Kenny is, I feel like a brother to Tommy. You know, they've just been so incredible all through my life, through the ups and downs, and I've been very blessed through that. So let me open up some questions you may have. Faith, recovery, drinking. Dude. Hey.
There's many distractors in young people's life. Can you name one or possibly two big distractors when you were becoming an athlete that kept you from focusing totally on the mission at hand, and that was making yourself a good athlete?
It was, I will say it was a lot easier. We had in our whole section at Duke, there was one TV down in the chapter room. I think there was one phone on each hall. There was no cell phone. There was no internet. There was no social media. And there were actually people out on the quad talking to one another and having a conversation, which is something that's gone away. So I think things have grown, distractions have grown exponentially from what they were back then. And that's just to say that there weren't social things that you were dealing with. But today, I can't imagine being young and having my life shaped by, you know, I was up at UVA. It really hit me a number of years ago. I pulled up to this student bus stop, and there were about 15 undergrads there. Every one of them is like this. I'm like, are they talking to one another? You know, conversation. And you know, the other thing too that I think is really important in my scripture reading, but my reading in general, which is something that I didn't do when I was drinking. It's like pulling teeth to get the guys to read a book in our recovery programs. You know, they're gaming or they're on their phones or they're whatever, and just like pick up a book and read something of substance. It's really hard. That's a shame, because reading is really important to me and has been. I lost it for a while. I got it back.
You mentioned guarding Kareem.
Mm-hmm.
Who were some of the players in the NBA that gave you the roughest stuff?
Well, excuse me, he was the only one where I thought I had little to no chance of affecting the outcome of what he was wanted to do.
You love everybody else.
Yeah, that being said, I had the best seat in the house. You know, he's right here, and I'm like, all right, so what are you gonna do? Oh, okay, go ahead, you know. And if he missed, I looked like a hero. If he made it, well, he's green. He's supposed to make shots. And, you know, and I played in a really incredible era in the NBA and played against some really great centers. I mean, Patrick Ewing, Elijah Wan, then going back, Artis Gilmore. I mean, I played against Wes Unseld at the end of his career, even Dave Cowens at the end of his career. And, you know, it was just, there were great players, there were great teams, great rivalries, and it was a really fun time to be a part of that league. And I will say that my Philadelphia teams are probably most like my Duke teams, and as far as being really a close-knit group. And Charles Barkley has been incredible in my recovery. And, you know, we remain close to this day. So just, you know, I was an only child, so I was a seeker. You know, I wanted to collect people. And, you know, my Duke guys were my brothers and still are. And the guys that I met in the NBA are my brothers. And the irony of the whole thing was I turned my back on them for 3 or 4 years. Guys who, you know, were the closest to me, who could have done something, who wanted desperately to do something for me. But I came around in the end, and the biggest blessing is I didn't lose any of them through that time. They all stuck with me, which was incredible.
I have a question. Coach K, I don't know a person, but appears to be a man of strong faith.
Mhm.
Do y'all have a relationship where discuss that?
Well, I'm the break point. That my coach, Bill Foster, left when I graduated and went to South Carolina. Kenny and Gene and Jim had to play for Mike his first year. And trust me, he wasn't Coach K that first year.
Right.
And Mike Krzyzewski, you know, I felt for those guys. And that being said, I got to know him on a personal level. And that's been a great joy to, you know, see obviously what he's done and to see how, you know, we go back every year for 23 years. He's had a fantasy cap at Duke, and all of the proceeds have built a community center in Durham named after his mother, Emily. And it's been a wildly successful program, but he's really invested himself in the university and really in the city of Durham. But he's been a big part of that community for a long time.
About close to the time my father passed away, he told me a story about the fact that he used to buy a half ton of food every day. And when he got through, he took the top on it, pulled it out over the bluff at the end of the, not the end of the dock, but near the dock. But he never worried about it until one day we had a can of tire. Every one of those bottles floated up to the top of the marsh.
Yeah.
You can see it scared him so bad, he got this boat, went over there, and picked up every one of those bottles. Went across the river to the trestle and broke every one of those bottles up on the rocks. Scared him so bad, he quit drinking after he joined the Masons. But that's basically how he quit.
Yeah, and there are different, you know, like for me, it was timing. I wasn't ready to hear the voice, but my son's voice was the one that I was ready, and I wanted to hear. And, you know, the other thing that I did, which I didn't even know I was doing it, is a part of the 12-step program, which I didn't go through officially, but right after that intervention until the 13th, I made about 40 or 50 phone calls to people who I hadn't spoken to, who I had shut out in my life, to say, I'm going to treatment on the 13th, you know, to set an accountability for myself, but also to apologize to them. And I didn't lose the person. I didn't lose one, but they were so happy. They've been waiting so long to get that phone call. And that was really powerful. Matter of fact, they used to joke down where I was in residence that they got sick of going out to the post office or going out to the mail, because I got more letters than anybody they'd ever had treatment out there. Which was, again, that's just incredibly uplifting to me, but a real blessing. And I'll just conclude again by saying it's been a joy to be here with Marshall and with you all, and my surprises today and see some familiar faces. But now I'm done working, I'm ready to see him work. And God bless, I look forward to being in the service with you all.
All right. Hey, thank you all so much. And I was just noticing, reflecting over here, Father Rich with the laptop. And here's Father Rich, the Tar Heel, having to stare for 40 minutes. A photograph of Cameron up here. But I do want to push this forward. The Duke Chapel there, which was an important part of my college career, working there and work study once a week at the information desk. And then there's Mike. Getting a rebound and putting it back against State. Who's a State? There's somebody was here who went to State. Anyway, and there's Mike in front of the fraternity house at Duke. And that was in the era of the unfortunate 1970s haircuts that we all had. But he's held up well. And
Color.
that's right. It's just the photograph. Yes. But anyway. Thank y'all for being here. And again, how about a thanks for Mike? All right. As we wrap it up today, remember.